Today. My name is Jay Sherling, Executive Director of the American Veterans Tribute Organization, AVT, and we welcome you back for another installment on how PTSD affects our military, our veterans, and today we focus on the military spouses, people who are at home and have veterans returning home to civilian life and are running into certain problems. And we welcome today our 2013 AVT honoree, Angie Pearce. Her husband, retired Staff Sergeant Brian K. Pearce, were our honorees this year at our tribute at Lake Gaston, Virginia, and what a wonderful event that was for them. Brian was injured in 2006 by an IED and has exploded at his Humvee, leaving him with traumatic brain injury and later PTSD. And we welcome Angie Pearce today, and again we welcome Jerry Vassar, AVT board member and CEO of Lakeside Educational Network. And Angie, thanks for joining us today. We want to get into and talk about the frustrations, I guess, is a good place to start, where with what you went through of getting Brian home and going through the early stages of PTSD, and we'd like to talk to you and start there.
Okay. Well, hi, Jay. Hi, Jerry. Really, it started out, Brian was not, he didn't recognize that he had PTSD. I kind of assumed that he had PTSD, and to begin with, the doctors called it, what was it, combat reactionary stress or whatever. They weren't really calling it PTSD. We went through, he was injured in 2006. It was really 2007 when he finally got the actual diagnosis of PTSD when we were going through the compensation with the VA. He was in and out of therapy for several months. It was more him going through the motions of going through therapy and pretending that he was seeking help, if you will. You know, I was constantly nagging at him, and that didn't help matters either with the nagging. I finally just had to come to the realization that I had to accept it, and then he would have to accept it when he was ready to accept it.
And that's one of the things that we run into with the military, and Jerry, we talked about this, is that when you are, let's say, a staff sergeant like Brian was, that you have a management role, and what you say is the right thing, and you have to lead your troops, and that's something that spouses have to deal with when their other spouse comes home.
Right, Jay. I think the whole structure of the military is based on good authority, and that's your safety, that's your protection, and that's exactly how you function and hold your world intact. Then when you come home and you have PTSD and other symptoms, you're still trying to hold that world intact by controlling those around you. Of course, they're not quite used to that system, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Angie, I'd like to ask you, too, what are the specific things that you saw in Brian that were really different than what you knew him to be before his wartime experience?
He was very jumpy, it was easily agitated, was sweating at night, just different. His personality was different. It didn't take much to really irritate him, and it wasn't big things that he would get upset or aggravated about. It was the little things. The kids could make a noise, or you couldn't joke with him. Riding in a car, he was horrible in a car, so it made it really difficult.
Did you ever get figure out why some of these things were going on in him during this searching time where you're trying to figure out what was happening?
Yes and no. I did a little research myself because I kind of prepared myself before he actually got injured that it might be a possibility of him suffering from some post-traumatic stress syndrome. Talking to him while he was in country, before he was injured, certain little things that he said to me was not typical from personality-wise, things that Brian would say. He usually dealt with stress a lot differently than what he was, and when he started saying, it kind of piqued my interest, and I'm like, okay. And then when he came back and was real startled, that's when I really started noticing the big thing. But I was trying to decipher how much of this was PTSD and how much of it was the brain injury, and come to find out a lot of them go hand in hand. So it made it a lot more difficult.
So you spent a lot of time searching through what is going on and trying to figure it out in terms of being a good provider and a good caretaker for him,
right,
relationally, and yet you are also, I'll say, victimized in how you managed your family, your kids, your own relationship with him from some of these symptoms, and had to deal with that as well.
Right, exactly. And then actually I have post-secondary PTSD myself, or PTSD, however you want to call it. And, you know, I could recognize the signs in Brian, but it was hard for me to recognize the signs myself. And I just was recently diagnosed within the last 2 years.
And what do you think the symptoms were for you?
Well, now that I know, it was very blatantly obvious. I was in college at the time, and I'd never struggled in college the way that I did this go around with college. And I couldn't concentrate. I was stressed out. I felt disorganized. I couldn't sleep at night. I was irritable. I'm on high alert now too, and I think that's because I'm constantly watching for Brian to make sure, because if a noise, something hits and it's an odd noise, you know, I'm looking to see, okay, what is it? Okay, Brian, it was fireworks, or Brian, it was just a car going off, or, you know, whatever. So I'm constantly really surveilling where I'm at, my area.
Okay. Okay, so you ended up having to protect yourself in the relationship.
Yes.
And I think that's common for dealing with someone who has this level of PTSD. For Brian, now that we have some reflection back, I remember you told us stories about places that he'd go and incidences that he had with your daughter and other situations where he was in fact trying to protect you from situations that kind of didn't exist.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It made it really difficult.
Yeah, what was the impact of that?
It made it really difficult, Jerry, because, you know, especially having with teenage kids, you know, you go through all of the ordeals of having teenagers anyway,
right.
And then Dad's becoming overbearingly protective. And at the time, it wasn't registering with me. And how do you explain to your daughter that it has nothing to do with her, that it's everything that's going on with Dad, and he's really just trying to protect her, even though not really anything there to protect. Everything is safe, but in his mind, it is not.
Did you ever see him be triggered by anything around you that for most people would consider a normal phenomenon, but for him it was a huge trigger? Can you remember any of those?
Well, we have a neighbor that it really trigger him. It was our daughter's friend, like we had talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
Certain times of certain fragrances, we were in the mall and somebody walked by and there was a fragrance and it triggered him. He didn't really do anything, but he gets this dazed, this deer in the headlights look, and his face just kind of goes white, and it's just almost like he's not here with me. It's just
right.
Like he's completely gone from what's going on around him other than what he's thinking in his mind.
That's called dissociation. Very
Yes.
predictable. His heart rate drops, he phases out, he looks like he's gone somewhere else.
Right.
And family members have no idea what just happened.
Right.
And I think that's a significant issue, is how much are we actually really training our spouses, our children, our families when they are receiving individuals back from very interesting battle and wartime experiences that have given them these reactions and created this hypervigilance or this dissociative state
Right.
that they go in and not knowing what to do or even what it is. And I think that's significant for us, Jay, as we look at what AVT is doing with our military families.
I'd like to also end up by asking Angie one other question. And Angie, your background is, you and Brian, it took about 5 years to really find help and to really grasp the concept of, hey, Brian says this is my issue. It's not my family. It's me. What advice would you give to spouses out there to help maybe their husband or wife seek treatment, or what would you suggest they do to help the process further along?
Well, that's a good question because, you know, it varies. And the thing about it is we had the help for Brian, but he was reluctant for the help. And so if you've got the help there and the tools there, that was the hardest thing for me to understand, is we had tools there for him to access, but he wouldn't allow himself to do it the appropriate way. He would pick and choose. So I guess my biggest thing is when you're dealing with somebody with PTSD, and especially if you have family and kids, take care of yourself, because you can't make them get help. You can only suggest and give them the resources and say, hey, I'm there to support you, however you need me to be there. And I kind of had to leave it at that point, because it was not worth the fighting back and forth, because he was going through the motions, but he was wasting doctor's times. He was wasting his time when there was other people that could be accessing that treatment. He wasn't ready, and until your spouse or loved one is ready, there's not really much you can do. You need to be able to accept what you can handle and let them handle what they're ready to do.
One thing that we're trying to do is help veterans, help spouses, help their kids, their employers. And what we're doing here, the back and forth virtually, is part of the concept, but we certainly want to expand on that.
Right, Jay. I think one of the significant things that we want to see change in the homes of our veterans and their children and their spouses is that we're conveying information that is accurate and helpful to what they're going through. I think for our veterans, I think it's very helpful to have another veteran who we are going to train take some of the information that we're going to send to them via stream from another trained source that says this is what PTSD looks like. This is what transition looks like. These are the typical behaviors we're going to be looking for. And imagine if we had that information, we had a veteran and other veterans sort of around the virtual table talking about, wow, I have that, I have that, I have that, I'm thinking that, I have that. Now PTSD doesn't become a negative psychological label as much as it is a shared experience and a reality for each of them, which would have prevented so much for Angela to be sitting there trying to figure out, how do I convince him of what he is going through? How do I get him to understand his impact on our families? Angie, how would you feel about information like that being handed to Brian sort of in a private online format with other veterans in attendance?
Personally, I think that would be great. Like we were talking earlier, the education and understanding for Brian anyway, he was all about, if he didn't understand it, didn't make sense to him, then it wasn't happening. And so he really wanted to understand and know what it was, not just somebody saying, hey, labeling him, you have a brain injury or you have PTSD or what have you. So I think that would be a perfect source for him, because he does like to use the computer.
As most of our current generation does. They love to get online and look up things and figure out what it is. And imagine if you could even establish relationships with people who are sharing your experience with you and helping you with even the diagnostic process. Angela, how do you feel, too, about what it would be for a wife to have a level of support and information about this issue?
I think I think that would be great as well, because you can go on and search and Google, but being sure that you get the accurate and the most current information right at your hands, rather than having to go through Google, and then you end up to this page and you find out that it's not factual information, it's more opinion rather than the actual diagnosis and how to understand it, because you can find anything on the internet.
Right. What are the kinds of things you were looking for when you were searching the internet as you were trying to figure all this out?
I looked up PTSD, what it actually was, what were some of the signs and the symptoms. how I should interact with Brian, because sometimes interacting with him, I can make the situation worse, but I wasn't trying to make it worse. I was trying to talk him down or whatever. And fortunately for me, Brian was never violent. For some people, unfortunately, their PTSD is so severe that, it gets violent. Brian was never violent. His is more reactionary than anything. So, just trying to figure the different symptoms out and how to go about handling them.
What do you think would be helpful for your children in that, too, to have that source, have an information source to them?
I think that would be good because they could go and get it. Our son, of course, you've met him. He likes to hear it from the experts, and if it comes from the experts, then he can understand it better and deal with it better. So
I think he is an expert, right? And just about
well, he thinks he is.
As most of our teenagers.
Right, exactly. So I think they're at the age, being 14 and 15, that would be very beneficial for them if it's age appropriate, because they need to be, everybody in the family needs to be able to understand it, even the kids, even in the most age appropriate way.
Another thought is, as we put this information out and we have it available online, wouldn't this give your family great talking points around the table as they're discussing what we're facing? One thing I really value about your family and admire about it is that you're very open now in your discussions about each other. You're very open.
Right.
And I think some people would look at that and be a little afraid of those discussions, but your family moves to those discussions very boldly. And I think it's because of what you've been through.
Right, and I think it's because we've been dealing with it for so long. We're almost 7 years out, so probably somebody that's just starting out probably wouldn't attempt it that way, but we have tippy-toed, we've lived on eggshells, and we're at the point, well, I should say I'm at the point that I'm over this. We're a wounded family. This is our new life. We have to be able to move forward. Let's just get the tools and let's just do it. Right. Where, so we were that family that tippy-toed around and was afraid to open our mouths to each other, or if it was condescending and it was more arguments. So if you'd have seen us 3 years ago, total different family.
And don't you think information like we're talking about would open those discussions much earlier?
I think so. I think it would especially give a spouse, if she's struggling with how to pinpoint what to do, maybe if she had something she could read up on that was educational, that she could give to her husband, say, this is whatever, A, B, C, and D, that he can look at it and see, not just say, okay, you've got PTSD, all right, you're being delusional or whatever. If you have, I think it works a lot, especially in the military. If you've got stuff in writing that says, hey, this is what's going on, people are able to deal a little better.
So in your advocacy for military families and for spouses, I'm assuming that you would find it very helpful to be a part of such a movement.
Oh, absolutely. I want to be able to, we've been helped so much and have been able to move forward and get to the point we are, that I want to be able to give back. And if that means I help one family, then it's been all worth it.
Right. Right.
Angie, thanks so much for your time today.
No problem.
This has been a great talk, and Jerry, thank you for your expertise in this matter. And as we continue to push out information with ABT and the Lakeside Education Network, I'm Jay Sherling, Executive Director of ABT, and thanks to Jerry Vassar, CEO of Lakeside Education Network. And as always, we want to remind everyone that we're located on the web at a-v-t.org, also on Facebook at facebook.com/abtorg, and also on Twitter at abtorg. So we welcome everybody to continue to join us, and thanks again to Jerry and Angie for this conversation, and we'll have more later, and I'll end it here and have everyone have a good rest of your week. We'll see you soon.